Hello, everybody. Welcome for those of you who have been to Vermont Law School before plenty of times, and to those of you who haven't, into this classroom, 107, in this wonderful classroom building that did not exist when I was a student here back in 1989 to 1992. My name is Dave Salone. I work here at the law school. I've been here for about 2.5 years as the Vice President for Alumni Relations and Development. And my role is to thank people, generally speaking. And so I'm going to thank the student groups that are hosting this talk and sponsoring our today's speaker and book talk, Charlie Sellars. They are the Environmental Law Society, the Energy Law Society, and the Business Law Society. So these are three of a whole multitude of different student groups here at the Law and Graduate School that exist every day to work with students and help them sort of figure out what direction they want to go in the areas of law and policy as part of their overall educational experience. And I'd also like to thank the Environmental Law Center, which is also a sponsor, and that is sort of in so many ways our raison d'etre for being here. We are the premier environmental law and policy school in the nation, if not the world, and so we're proud of that, and that is another sponsor of this program. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to one of our students who is the co-chair of the Environmental Law Society, Taryn Dunn, who's a JD class of 27, a second-year student here. We're going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Charlie, for coming. Today, we're here to listen to Charlie Sellars, the Sustainability Director at Microsoft, to talk about his new book, What We Can Do, the Climate Optimist Guide in Sustainable Living. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Vermont today. When I was welcomed to Vermont, I was moving into a small town called Tunbridge up the road. My dad was helping me move in, and we met somebody in the general store, and he said, you know, we don't like when people move to Vermont, but now that you're here, you should check out the Tunbridge World Fair and the co-op, and if I had a guess, Vermont would probably welcome the same way. Now, in all candor, I had a lunch with Charlie beforehand and just about had him promise that this wasn't going to be a greenwashing initiative. And that may seem silly, but in all reality, Vermont has the second lowest number of data centers in the country and has prided itself on its resilience in the face of a rapidly changing world and environment. Vermont Law and Graduate School is one of the most notable environmental law programs in the country. So we are dedicated to conversations in this space. Charlie, we welcome you to join our discussion. Please welcome me in inviting Charlie Sellars to the stage.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Oh, it's turned on already. Awesome. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to be giving a talk about some of the things that I've learned that make me a climate optimist, hence why I wrote this book. But I want to just give everyone a little bit of an overview of what I'll cover and a very important caveat, because I think this is important. So I'll start because I think sounds like this might be interesting, of just how I got into this space and into my career, how I became an author, my pragmatic case for some of the climate optimism I'm seeing, as well as some of the evolutions in how we measure impact that has led us to create sustainable impact at scale that enables all of us to get involved, which is very exciting. And as I go through, you know, I have Q&A at the end, but I really do welcome anybody. If anyone just hears anything that's just like, that's questionable, I don't know about that, like raise your hand, shout out, call me a liar, whatever. Just like do whatever you want to do. But I want to make a very important caveat. It's down here that this presentation reflects the personal views and opinions of the presenter as an author. I'm here on behalf of the book. and does not reflect the position or opinion of any organization, institution, and individual with which I am affiliated, which in this case means Microsoft. I am not here speaking on behalf of Microsoft. I'm here speaking on behalf of Charlie. You guys are all lawyers. Hopefully you appreciate that I have a disclaimer to make sure that we're just very clear on what I'm here to do. I am not here to sell you data centers. God, no. Not trying to do that. But as we go through it, just a little bit of background on me before I get into my career journey. I've written this book. I think what's fun about the journey that I've had that I hopefully is a little point of inspiration for others is I have zero background in sustainability whatsoever. I didn't take a single class on environmental anything in college. I was not in the field for 7 years starting my career. And now I get to be a director of sustainability full time, and I have been for over 5 years at Microsoft. And so something happened in there, which I'll tell you about, that got me in here. And this is part of the reason why I share so much optimism about this space, and why I think it's actually a very pragmatic thing to be optimistic in this space. So I'll start with my misconception, just how did I even get into here in the first place? I got my Bachelor of Arts a little bit down the road at Williams College, so not so far outside. It's about 3 miles south of Vermont. I would go on runs and accidentally end up in Vermont, so I effectively went to school in Vermont. And I got a Bachelor of Arts in physics, which you guys all hopefully know in the liberal arts discipline, that means you're doing that at the same time as taking theater classes and history classes and philosophy classes. And music classes, and I didn't take any sustainability like I mentioned. Because at the time I was told, like, hey, if you want to get into sustainability, you have to become a climate scientist. You have to be really, really enthusiastic about going up to Greenland and drilling ice cores for a living. And I wasn't super enthusiastic about that, to be honest. And so I just was effectively told, like, oh, well, you don't have what it takes to be a climate scientist, so go figure out some other career. And that's kind of what I did. I've always been a passionate person when it comes to making a positive impact. That's been part of my DNA ever since I've grown up. But I thought I had to kind of keep it outside of my career. So I almost parallel path. So I started at a company called Gartner. Do people even know what Gartner is? Got one guy knows what Gartner is. Okay, so not surprising. They're kind of lame. But so Gartner is a company that focuses around kind of research and advisory services for heads of IT and other major functions in companies. To translate that from whatever I just said is I would write big research reports for executives who may or may not read it and then would pay us money to do that. So that was fun. But it had nothing to do with sustainability. All of my quote unquote impact work was happening on the side. I was on the board of a nonprofit organization that was really focused on local community impact. And that's kind of the way I thought it had to be. It's like, okay, well, I've got corporate job, I've got impact on the side, and that's is what it is. And I think I say here at the bottom, my income and my impact I kind of kept separate. And then I kind of had this moment where, I was in my career, the 2016 elections happened, and I was like, wait a second, I don't think the federal government is going to be as focused on environmental protection as I might like. So I raised my hand at my company and said, hey, I've been here for 4 years. I'm writing reports for heads of IT. You're usually sitting me with all the oil and gas executives. Can I work on sustainability instead? Because I don't need people telling me that they bleed oil at dinner like every other day, which is a true story, by the way. Literally, one guy was just like, hey, if you cut me open, my blood would be black because I bleed oil. And I was like, what am I doing here? So I went to my boss and I just said, hey, I would like to work on sustainability. What can we do about that? And he's like, well, no, none of our clients care about this at all, so nothing here, but we just acquired this company that focuses on heads of supply chain. And so why don't you go try going over there? But the only job we have for you is effectively a glorified events manager. And I was like, sure, let's give it a shot. So I head over to Gartner's supply chain practice. These are the people who run supply chains of the world, the ones that are manufacturing things, they're the ones that are moving them on trucks and planes and boats, getting them to people. Oftentimes, especially back in the 2010s, this is where a lot of the negative impact of many companies was focused. And so they put me in charge of the events and said, yeah, maybe some of these clients might care about it more than the people who are in charge of IT. What was fun about this is nobody told me what I could or couldn't do. And so I just said to my new boss, I said, hey, I have control over what the agendas about for all these events. He's like, yeah. I was like, how much control do I got? He's like, as long as they keep paying us, just do what they're going to find valuable. So I was like, let's make it happen, baby. So I forced everyone to start talking about sustainability at every single one of these events for about 3 years. Not just sustainability, other topics that were kind of more impact forward beyond just the normal business conversations that would happen. And I gave myself this self-permission to converge the focus to try making my primary source of income where I was having the impact. And from that, I realized something very interesting, which is that the reason sustainability was not happening at my old company was for no good reason at all. No one had ever raised their hand to say, hey, we should try this out, let's try it. And I happened to be the first guy to really do it at the level that I wanted to see. And so after 3 years of doing it, I kind of became the quote unquote sustainability guy at this company called Gartner. Like the CEO's communications team was inviting me in to film promotional videos about all the conversations we were having with our supply chain leaders about the things they were doing to reduce their impact on the world. And it got to the point where one of my ahas here is that this is like a way that we can kind of create our own careers in the environmental space. Because at one point, one of my clients was the head of supply chain for Microsoft's consumer hardware business. And we were out for drinks after one of my events where she heard one of her competitors give a really good talk on sustainability, and she hated that because she's like, oh, if Stu's doing this, I gotta figure out what to do. And she just asked me, it's like, hey, you've convinced me from this work that I need a sustainability team. Do you want to start it? And so here I go, no background in sustainability whatsoever, but because I built it part of my brand, because I made it part of the job that I had within the scope that I had, I accidentally created this opportunity for myself. And I was smart enough to actually call her back and be like, you were serious about that, right? She's like, yeah, come on, start my sustainability team. I'm like, I have no background in this, whatever. She's like, yeah, that's fine, we'll figure it out. I'm like, all right, cool. And that's kind of how I got to where I am now, where sustainability is my full-time career. I'm a director of sustainability specifically right now in the cloud operations space. I used to be leading it for the consumer hardware space, but that's my full-time job. And then because I wasn't busy enough, I also decided to write a book in the middle of all this based on climate optimism. And for those of you who were really bored during COVID, this is what I did when I was bored during COVID. And I was literally just sitting on the couch playing Xbox and like Halo in my pajamas for hours every day. And eventually I was like, I gotta do something better with my time. And so I wrote this book too. So this is a little bit of the journey as someone who did not have a background in the space, who kind of gave himself permission to get into the space. And now I get to do really cool things at work. So that's how I got there. If folks have questions on that, feel free to raise it. But one of the things that I've seen at work, which is so fascinating, is like what has led to being effective in this space. Because when I came in, I was this new guy without a sustainability background, and a lot of the people there were already, we had a lot of environmental leaders in the space, but there were issues I was starting to see on their efficacy of actually getting a large company to change some of its practices to be more environmentally friendly. And so when I think about the flip that needed to happen, it was on some of the kind of the language we're using to be a little bit more optimism focused. And I'll talk about kind of some ways in which I define optimism here. So the first is around mindset. It's, just how do I improve the way I think and feel about the world? I mean, raise your hand. Who here is optimistic about the current state of the world? I got one guy. Two guys? All right. Two people, maybe three, four. Okay, 3.5. I got a half over here. But this is the point. We are constantly being bombarded with some real difficult mental spaces when it comes to seeing what's going on in the world. And part of the reason for this is because it's this really nefarious thing. The onus and the impetus of solving the environmental problems that are in front of us was very intentionally put on individuals by corporations. And so this audience probably knows this very well, but the phrase minimize footprint, actually I'll just ask, does anyone know who popularized the notion of the carbon footprint?
Gas and oil companies.
Oil and gas companies, that's right, British Petroleum. And so that was very intentional. Recyclers have done, or not recyclers, but plastic polluters have done the same. Like the reason that we have to pay for recycling services is because of Keep America Beautiful back in the 1950s, so you can blame Coca-Cola for that. Same thing happened here in climate. And we've internalized that language in terms of how we think about having an impact, but that really focuses on like, what can I give up? How much can I stop doing? What do I need to get away from? Rather than this really beautiful framing that a fellow author in this space talks about, which is instead focusing on maximizing impact. So if your focus is on minimizing footprint, it's all about what do we take away. If our focus is on maximizing impact in that mindset, it's about what can we add, what can we invest in, what can we innovate to solve some of these challenges. And we might be doing the exact same things in the process, but that language shift is one of the first things I found to be profoundly effective, especially in getting people who did not have sustainability in their titles or even in their responsibilities to actually care about this stuff. Like if you're designing a computer and someone comes up and says, hey, you need to remove this coding or I hate you, like that's one way to get people to get excited. But if we say like, hey, what if we try to innovate this really cool and fun way to use this brand new material, try out some really cool stuff, when you put it in this more optimism, like, hey, let's solve a tough problem together language, people get excited. And this was the first thing I ever worked on. It's a cute little guy. It's called the Ocean Plastic Mouse. And this is something where we were the first consumer hardware company to just try seeing, can we make a mouse with, partially using ocean plastic? And when I say ocean, I don't mean ocean bound. I literally mean it was just sitting in the ocean for God knows how long. And we just said like, hey, designers, we're going to dump a bunch of this stuff on the table. Tell us what you can do with this. And it was really fun to see how well they rose to that challenge. They said, wow, this stuff smells awful. It's biodegraded, or it's not biodegrading, that's the problem. It's like degraded, it's awful. It's hard to work with. What can we do with it? And we got to the point where we could use about 20% of the mouse was made out of ocean plastic. Not 100, because it literally falls apart at that point. But what was cool also is probably can't see if you're in the back, but there's actually a bunch of little speckles on it. And that was a fun moment too, because we said like, hey, actually the plastic is so bad that you can't get a consistent color on it. So that the designer's like, well, why should we fight it? Let's play with it. Let's see what happens if we know it has to be an imperfect finish. And so we got all these little speckles, and then, I don't know, it was one of our best pre-ordered mice of all time, I want to say, I think in the top 5, which was really fun. But that was kind of part of this changing the mindset mentality of like, let's try to solve a tough problem together and see what we can land. Another element to optimism that I like to think about is the narrative. And I mentioned before that if we're looking at headlines about how things are going in the planet, they are almost unequivocally awful. There's almost never good news when it comes to the planet these days. But that does lead to us being more likely to kind of fall into what I call climate doomism, or this notion of like the problem is so big and so many bad things are happening that many people just feel like, well, why should I even keep trying if what I do doesn't matter? Now, this room is going to be a little different because you're all either a community member or someone currently in school to try to do something about it. But your average person is, I've talked to a lot of people who are like, well, why should I bother changing anything that I do, because it's not worth it. But there are things that are important to realize, that underneath all the negative headlines are really cool things happening that you might not know. So I'll give 2 examples. One's on the slide, one's not. The one that's not on the slide is if we look at the share price of clean energy companies. When the big beautiful bill passed and rescinded a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act's subsidies towards clean energy, a lot of people were very worried, and the headlines were very worried about this is the end of clean energy in America. And it has made it harder. I'm not here to say it hasn't made it harder. But then you look underneath and you look at what are the share prices of these clean energy companies. It is currently right now trading at the highest valuation that it has ever had in the current administration, which means that the actual money behind all of this is still very, very bullish that investing in clean energy is going to be a very good thing to do. We don't see that, but that's not the headline that we see. And then similarly, you've probably all heard or seen some headline about some company walking back their sustainability commitments. And that is happening. But what you don't see is, and this is way too small to read, I apologize, is that the average size of companies that are setting their sustainability goals, well, first off, the number is increasing and the size is getting smaller. And that's awesome. So in the early 2020s, very, very big companies like the one I work for set these very big sustainability goals. But then over time, it has been the push from those large companies, as well as the push from regulators, as well as the push from consumer sentiment, that have converged on the supply chain of these big companies to get them to start setting their own sustainability goals as well. And this is one of the cool things. One of my direct reports, his whole job is to go work with suppliers to get them to set up sustainability commitments that they might never had before. And that's really cool. And you start to see, like, actually, if you look at the broad scope of a lot of the companies in America, we're getting more to sign up and we're getting smaller companies to sign up, which means that it's effectively permeating through. You don't hear that in the news. You're never going to hear that in the news because that's not what gets people, we have to remember that the news is explicitly set up to be a profit-seeking enterprise in this country, and that's not what gets people to click. The third kind of optimism that I quite like, this is why I wrote my book, it's all around empowerment. And it's just, do I feel empowered to make a difference? Do I feel empowered to make a change? And what do I need to know and do to actually make that change? So this is ultimately why I was so compelled, is I'm so fortunate at my day job to get access to some really cool cutting edge climate science that is not permeating to the average person. And so I said like, hey, well, if you are inspired to make a difference in the planet, but you have no empowerment and no tools, then you're not going to be able to do anything. We need to obviously make sure people are inspired that what they do matters, but we also have to equip them with the right frameworks, the right tools, the right wherewithal to do something about it. Because if we don't believe we have the power to make a difference, we won't. Probably not, at least not on purpose. And so much of the reason I wrote my book was to make sure that people still stay in the fight, so to speak. And this is why, and this is going to be maybe controversial to some, but I truly believe it, is right now, if we look at the tools that we have available compared to a decade ago, it's unbelievable how many tools we have to make a difference, which is really exciting. And now is a really fun moment to have a pretty profound impact in everything that we do. 10 years ago, it was a lot about doing a lot of basic research to get us to the point where we had the right technologies. Now we've got a lot of those right technologies. We've got a lot of the right carbon accounting. And like, I don't know if there's any people here who used to be accountants or are currently accountants, but like, carbon accounting, really fun, really exciting stuff. Not sexy for a lot of people, sexy for me. And I'll talk a little bit about what that gives us, which is fun. But before I get into, I'm going to slap a whole bunch of data at you. Before I slap the data at you, though, just any questions so far as I keep going? All right, data slap coming. Here we go. All right, so I looked at, I've got over 200 footnotes in my book. I looked at source after source after source to figure out, from a human-centric point of view, from an individual-centric point of view, where does our daily set of emissions come from in our personal lives? And this was so fun and so fascinating to figure out. It looks across pretty much, excluding the emissions that you might create at work, or by the way you vote, just in your daily life, where is actually the impact coming from? And this is really profound because once we know, then we know where to focus, we know where to prioritize, and know where to put our time and our effort, either personally or professionally. So the first one that's really interesting is that the majority of our emissions tend to come from our homes. And when it comes to what portions, and this is going to especially be true here in Vermont, I'm from Minnesota, so another cold country, cold state, so to speak, is heating. Heating is the #1 source of emissions at in most houses. You probably all know this. Part of the reason is because it's typically not electrified, which means it has to be burning gas. Water heating, by extension, is the second highest, and that one shocked me. Actually, water heating is going to be a bigger source of emissions in most homes than air conditioning. It turns out that we're heating our water very often, and it takes a lot of energy to heat that water. Electronics are third place, and that can kind of go up or down depending on how much you play Halo at home. Which, by the way, when we get into the corporate sustainability and how that's calculated, you playing Halo at home actually is a part of the emission set of Microsoft. So if you're like in a deep, deep gamer sesh, we feel that in our numbers. So we'll get to that later. The second piece, which is so interesting, is our emissions on the road. And I was amazed to see that these are almost the same size between what we do in our house and what we do in our car. Like, do you guys remember when Ford put out its Ford F-150 Lightning, their first ever truck that was EV? I'm seeing a nod over here. Do you remember one of the things that they said was that, like, when your power goes out, your truck can power your house? Like, awesome. When I first saw that, I was just like, that's bullshit. Like, are you kidding me? But then it's like, when you actually look at how much energy it takes to move a car versus power a home, they're pretty equivalent. So they're not lying when they say if your power goes down, your truck can power your house for a day or two, which is bonkers. And because of that, so much of the second biggest set of our emissions comes from just how we move around. A lot of it is driving. Depending on if you're the kind of person to take vacations or commute, that will influence things. If you're taking international vacations every other month, obviously that's going to be a huge portion for you. If you're flying for work, which is not on here, that'll also be a big part of it as well. But typically driving tends to be one of those things that is a major contributor. And then the third one, and we were just talking a little bit about the agricultural impact in our personal lives, comes from our emissions at the store of the things we buy every day or every now and then, and food is the #1 by a landslide. This is crazy. Almost 20% of all of our emissions comes from just our diets. And I'm not going to be here to proselytize of like you have to have a certain diet, but I will be here to proselytize that you should finish all your food. 30 to 40% of all food in America is thrown away. So you can still be, Mr. Red Meat, Mr. Big Burger, and just not throw away your food. And if you eat it all, 30 to 40% less impact right away if we actually eat what we have. But ultimately, though, this is the kind of data that's really fun because we know if we want to focus either in our personal lives or in our professional lives, or our political lives, we focus on what I call the 3 Ds. Our focus on our driving, focus on our diets, and our focus on our desire to be warm. And the third one's a stretch, but I couldn't think of another good D word, so bear with me on that. So the sources of this are all in the appendix of my book. There's going to be different people with different views, and it's slightly different, but a lot of the sources that I use for this are from the EPA, from the EIA, from as many government institutions as possible during the Biden administration when I wrote this book. Hopefully this is like somewhat interesting data. Maybe you guys already know this, but this is the kind of data that we just didn't have a decade ago that now lets us focus in a little bit more on what actually matters. And I'm going to talk about this now in a more even pointed way of like now it's getting into influencing the decisions we make in like product development. So who here knows a lot about life cycle assessments? All right. Sweater in the front. You seem to know everything so far, which I love. So you're going to know this then. The hidden cost of making things versus moving things is pretty interesting, isn't it? So for everyone else who's less familiar, if you were to guess, out of curiosity, what percentage of a computer's lifetime emissions comes from making it in the first place? Go for it.
I cheated because I read this in your book, but it was 80%.
So yeah, it's just around 80%. Isn't that crazy? There are all of these hidden things that are happening that happen way before you get your product that you're not privy to, that are phenomenally like impactful, and we just don't get visibility to it because we only get the final product. This is assuming the lifetime emissions of a computer as well, with an assumption that you're using the computer for 4.5 years. So if you do the math, you have to use your computer or your phone for more than a decade before the energy it took to charge it exceeds the energy it took to make it in the first place. Once you know this, though, and you start putting this kind of information in this environmental accounting towards a lot of the things that we make, that profoundly impacts both our own behavior as well as the behavior of the people making these things. So in terms of our own behavior, it's like, okay, wow, if I know that there's a huge cost to make things that I wasn't thinking about before, then my decision tree changes away from, oh, every time there's a new computer that's more energy efficient, I got to upgrade, to how do I keep my existing computer for longer? How do I focus on learning how to repair this thing? How do I buy a refurbished device next time I buy it? How do I make sure I trade in my device so it's reused by somebody else instead of recycling it or keeping it in my closet or my attic for my old, everyone here, raise your hand if you got an old computer in your attic somewhere, like, yeah. So, that's part of the challenge is all that wasted energy to make it, we're just sitting in our closets. What's also fascinating about this is if you're on the designing side of the product, then you also know, like, if I have to measure against a very specific metric, typically in corporate America, it's metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and I know that 75% comes from making this thing, then that pushes a lot of the focus away from just more and more energy efficiency features, which are still important and are still happening, but towards entirely new spaces that might have been ignored. Supply chain decarbonization, going to all the people manufacturing these things and their suppliers to make sure that they're putting clean energy in their operations. The repairability of the devices, making sure that those go way up so that the lifetime actually expands. When I first started at Microsoft, we had a 0 out of 10 score on repairability for our computers. I've been told on good authority that's pretty bad. We're up to like 8 now, which is not 10, but 8 out of 10 is pretty good, to the point where we used to have to assume a computer only lasted 3 years. Now we can say it lasts 4.5. 50% increase in lifespan from the repairability that we worked on for our computers. That's super cool, but that, like, a lot of the reason we knew to focus there is because we had access to this down to the individual component level, which is so cool. This is part of the way that we're empowered in ways that we might never have been before. And I'm now going to talk about another fun way where I got to use this in the design of the book itself. So this is just me being a guy who annoys his publisher too much. But out of curiosity, how many days of charging your smartphone do you think it takes to equal the amount of energy it takes to make a book? A regular old book. 4 days? A little more than 4.
A year?
A little more than a year. 2 years. 2 years of charging your iPhone before you equal the amount of energy it takes to just make a book. My book is only 1 year, and I'll talk about all this stuff. So I was able to get mine down by half. But this was really fun. So I went to my publisher. My publisher is awesome. They're based in Minneapolis with me. And I said, I want to make the most sustainable book I can. They're like, well, you just wrote about sustainability, so you did it. I'm like, no. Let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the physical book. And so it was everything from, sewn thread binding, which is really cool. So normally book binding is glued, which is cheaper, but it also means it's more likely to break quicker. And so you're getting a book that might be destroyed before its natural end of life. You're looking at, everything from using 100% post-consumer recycled waste, recycled paper, to even like my margins are pretty tight, but that means I don't need as many pages because we're able to fit more words per page. Like I could have also achieved that by having really, really, really small font, but that would have been real tough to read. So I didn't end up doing that. And speaking of fonts, by the way, do you guys know about sustainable fonts? Do you guys know this existed? Very cool. All right, now I wanted to use the chalkboard because I love chalkboards, but come with me on a journey here for a second. Let's say I want to make a letter A, right? And normally, if you think about all the ink it takes, it's typically completely filled in, right? So the world of sustainable font says, well, how much ink do you actually need for someone to be able to recognize that the letter is the letter that they are reading? Because normally all of our letters are completely filled in, right? And so this is a whole science being like, well, let's just start making hollow fonts. Let's just make it so it's even just the outline. Like you kind of can tell that's an A, right? This stuff is real hard to read. So I did not write my book with any sustainable fonts, and I apologize. That could have been a way to reduce the ink by more than half, but it was a tough sell when I looked at this. Oh, it was hard to read. I couldn't do it. But there's all these other things that are interesting also in terms of the things you don't even recognize until you dive into the problem. So if you notice my book does not shine when I move it, that's a good thing, because do you know what makes the book shiny? Yeah, it's plastic. So that was very intentional by design. It's also cheaper for me to not wrap it in plastic wrapper, like put spot cloths on it. And then there's this other company that you have to think about when you think about the distribution model of your book. You guys ever heard of Amazon, this company, a startup, delivering things? They're tough to work with when it comes to being an author, I'll tell you that. And one of the things that they really try to strong arm you into is doing exclusivity deals with them. They're like, hey, if you only sell through our platform, we'll give you a better margin on every book sell. But if I were to do that, then that means I cannot have the book be purchased by libraries. And libraries are one of the best ways to sell a book in terms of getting the most people to read it against a single manufacturer of the book. Because if 20 people can read one book, that's 19 books I did not have to make. And that's 38 years of charging, or in my case, 19 years of charging a smartphone that we got to avoid. Very fun. And to that point, the digital versions are also really important, the ebooks and the audiobooks, because if you read or if you listen to the book in less than a year, then you're probably having a hundreds of times lower impact enjoying the book via a digital version versus a physical version. So all this stuff is really important to give the optionality. It was really fun to go through this. I didn't even mention I got 1% for the Planet certified on a book, which I didn't know you could do, but you can. So I got to donate 1% of my proceeds to environmental charities. This was a lot of fun. I loved doing this. And my publisher loved doing this as well, because they're like, you're the first person who's ever really pushed us on this, but we're low-key like vibing with it. And it was great. And so, all it took was just, similar to how I started my career in sustainability, being the person to be like, hey, I'm gonna raise my hand and just ask what's possible here. I'm gonna raise my hand and say, is there any reason we can't do this? And now that we've done this with my publisher, it's awesome because they know that they can do this with other authors who also want to have a more environmentally friendly book, which is super cool. I am paying a little bit more per book to do all of this. That's okay. I'm more willing to do that and actually walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And so here's another little fun thing, is there's even tools that didn't exist 10 years ago. Like here's one from the Environmental Paper Network Paper Calculator 4.0 that says like, hey, put in the kind of way that you made your book and we'll show you your impact of it. And so it's just a little thing for my initial print run, just making all these changes to the, using 100% post-consumer recycled waste, paper, and the vegetable inks and all that. It's not huge, but it's something. It's 24 trees, it's 2,000 gallons of water, it's 10,000 pounds of greenhouse gases. Like, I don't know. I think it's kind of neat. And this is the kind of like maximize impact language, going back to the initial framing, that I think is so fun in the environmental space, because this was all about like, what can we do to co-innovate something that's better for the planet if this thing has to exist in the first place? If I had taken the minimize footprint direction, I don't know, it could have been a lot different of an approach, maybe a lot less fun in the process. So that is my last slide before I start talking about Microsoft. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to repeat it. I'm not here as a representative of Microsoft, but I imagine that's probably why most of you actually showed up, less so than my book. That is okay. Before I get there, though, any questions? I think one might have come on in the chat, but I don't know who's monitoring the chat. Are you?
Yes, we've got a question in the chat. They're wondering, in your circle chart, did your food number include all the embedded carbon or just the waste and other purchase/post-purchase emissions?
All of the embedded carbon. And so typically, there's a slide that's not in this deck, it's in the book, which is really phenomenal, is especially for beef production, and this is, the majority of this is from beef, I think like a majority of America's land, or at least a plurality of America's land, is used for cattle. And one of the top 5 uses of land is for food for the cattle. And so that impact is also considered in this as well. And the reason cattle tend to be problematic from an emissions point of view is because they fart. And the methane is a 28 times more potent greenhouse gas than regular carbon dioxide. And so, it turns out that cow farts are kind of a problem to deal with. There are really cool startups that are focusing on feedstocks for cows that make them fart less, which it's like, okay, cool. That actually is like an environmental thing you can do. I actually, in my course of business at Microsoft, I talk to cattle ranchers sometimes because they're like, hey, actually, all these cows are pooping. We can burn this poop for fuel. You want 100,000 cows worth of poop for your data center? I was like, maybe, I don't know. Talk to me more, but don't show me pictures. So this is one of those really interesting things also when people think about like, hey, I care about the Amazon rainforest, or I care about deforestation. What can I do to help it? Reducing your beef intake is actually like a way to start, because typically when you think about deforestation, especially in the Amazon, the deforestation is not for the timber. It's not for the lumber. It's to create extra space for either grazing of cattle or raising soybeans for the cattle. Just a weird, crazy world that all these systems are interrelated. Hopefully I answered the question of whoever was asking online. Sweet. Go for it.
I am also a carbon accounting nerd, and I, in my previous life before law school, spent some years working on advocacy efforts to make carbon accounting more accurate and better capture short-term aspects. So like for methane, we know that the methane is 28 times as potent as CO2 over a 100-year time span. Over a 20-year time span, it's 84 times more potent. When we look at refrigerants, they're thousands of times more potent than CO2 on a 20-year time span. And I'm curious, like, as you were looking at life cycle assessments and also like working through the sustainability of your book, if you looked at different time periods for carbon accounting and how that would have impacted your calculations?
Love that question. So the easiest and the simplest way to answer it is I standardize wherever possible around how the greenhouse gas protocol measures, and it typically consolidates all these into a single metric called MTCO2e, which is metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That tends to look at the lifetime multiplier of it, not the short-term multiplier. So I went with the lifetime multiplier. But also, at least for my book, I'd like to think my book's not creating any methane, but I don't know for sure. But it's a very fair and interesting question. Like, there are so many places where like financial accounting is more or less figured out. There's a whole thing called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. As you know, carbon accounting has none of that. We have something close to it, but even in this example of the computer, the way that the greenhouse gas protocol forces us to measure it right now is to assume at the point of sale the lifetime usage emissions of the device. But that doesn't account for any of the actual real usage by the consumer, as well as does not reflect any of the work that can be done by the producer to make the device more efficient via software over time. This is especially a problem in our Xbox side of the house, where we actually report non-GAAP so that we use real-time telemetry rather than point of sale usage expectations, so that we can actually reflect the cool things happening. I wasn't going to talk too much about Xbox, now I'm going to talk about Xbox. Who here has played Fortnite before? couple of hands. People know what Fortnite is. That you can go see concerts there now. I guess it's cool. Fortnite partnered with us. We have something called the Xbox Sustainability Toolkit, and it basically just says like, hey, we're going to look at your game code and figure out like where is your game code using a lot of energy. And we found out for Fortnite that a lot of people just pause the game and leave, and they just leave the paused game on, and it just sits there for a while. And the game was running the pause menu at full power, and it did not have to. So like there were a couple other things, and I'm simplifying a little bit, but effectively in like a week or two, we're like, hey, what if we just turn down, the resolution on the pause menu? That was 14 wind turbines of power. 14. That doesn't get captured in the current carbon accounting models, but that's why we're having to kind of like go beyond what's currently acceptable, because it's like we just saved 14 wind turbines by turning off a pause menu. Like, what else can we do here? Anyway. Don't let me nerd about this too much. Actually, let's not go too deep into this for everybody else's sake. Go for it, Dave.
On the construction of your book, I just want to mention that I'm grateful that it's been built to last, because it's actually in the collection here in our library, the Cornell Library on campus. So I'm mentioning this for students who might want to know that. If they want to check it out, it's will be available soon once it gets checked back in. But the library staff is on top of things, and they actually have it set up on a table with a display. So eventually you'll be able to get your hands on it here.
And I only had to take a 30% lower margin on Amazon sales to make that happen. Awesome, thank you.
And it's probably one of the most environmentally sustainably performing books in the entire collection of the library, I guess, given how you built it and produced it.
At least I'm someone who tried paying attention. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, thank you for the plug, by the way.
Sure.
So I really liked what you said earlier about how it empowers people when you shift your mindset from minimizing your footprint to like maximizing impact.
Yeah.
And how oil companies and plastic companies have kind of shifted the burden to society to make these changes in their lives, like not heat their homes and not eat food like that they want to eat. And people tend to get very like defensive and mad about that they have to do that. So what if in your book, in addition to this way that people can change their habits, you also included like by changing who they buy from, they can shift their impact, because then the burden almost shifts to those companies and you're taking away like profits. And it's not making people sacrifice the things that they want in their life, but it's sacrificing the company's profit, which shifts it back to them. That would be a cool like plot for you to have.
I don't think I have that graphic in here, do I? I might. No, I do not. Shoot, I didn't add it to this deck. Pretend you didn't see any of those numbers. That's the second and third part of the book. So the way I structure the book is it's in 3 concentric circles. It looks at what we can do in our personal lives, our professional lives, and our political lives. And so in our personal lives, we have the most authority and autonomy over what we want to do, because like, I don't know, if I want to buy a bag of Cheez-Its, who's going to stop me, But to your point, we need to think about collectively what role we have in terms of putting market signals up to the companies who are selling these things. I can tell you, like, if enough customers say, hey, we're only going to buy this product because it's sustainable, companies listen to that. I use consumer data all the time to justify investments in the programs that I was making, especially on the consumer hardware side. But I also didn't write this book to put the burden on individuals. The second portion, the professional, is all about what role do we play in the companies we work for to be able to change them from within. And then the third part is politically, what role do we play as civic actors, and what should we be voting for if we really care about this? And it's not in this presentation, but since you brought it up, I think it's fun. Out of curiosity, a vote in the 2020 election, how much environmental impact do you think that had, just in terms of the emissions? Just a single vote. In terms of like days of your life, how many days of your own life's emissions you offset by your vote in 2020? 2.5 years. Literally one single vote for a politician that supported the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act was the equivalent of you shaving 2.5 years of your life off in terms of the emissions. So, that's the power of these bigger systems that we're all a part of, but we have to actually vote and change the systems. And if we're in the companies, either if you're outside it, hold them accountable, or if you're inside it, change it from inside. But we cannot just think of ourselves as consumers. We have to think of ourselves as living across all of these entities. So you're 100% spot on. Yeah. Sorry, go there and then I'll go to you. Yeah.
Have you addressed, this isn't going to come out as a good question, but as an individual person trying to make decisions about the products that I buy or whatever I do, and I'm pretty interested in plastic, and it is hidden in many things.
Oh, yeah.
It's really hard to find out. So I found out that paper cups you drink coffee out of
That has plastic.
lined with a plastic film, and most people don't know that. Tea bags, I figured out they had synthetic fibers in them because my worm composting, I got little ghost bags after the worms had done their job. How do we get, and laundry sheets that people thought were so great, they've got but you have to be like a chemist to do the ingredients and figure that out because they're greenwashing it. So how do we make that kind of information more available so that individuals can make their own decisions and put pressure on the companies?
Totally. And to even add to yours, anyone here wearing a polyester piece of clothing right now?
Yeah.
Polyester is plastic too.
Old though.
That's good. You know, if it's you want to use your stuff as long as you can, of course. The number one source of microplastics actually entering the water table is clothes, is washing clothes. So that is exactly where the pressure and the demand, to your point, of like what individuals can do and request and demand, either themselves or via the way that they vote, is really important because this is what then can force what I like to call eco-labeling. So if it is up to like, the worst case scenario is that nobody has any information at all and you just go in and you're just kind of flying blind. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'll buy this because it looks more sustainable. The second worst is where we're currently at right now, which is actually a lot of these companies are producing sustainability reports, but it's not in the packaging. So like you go to Target or whatever stores nearby and you load up an 80-page sustainability report for this brand, and then you figure it out. Then you go to the next thing you want to buy, then you read another 80-page sustainability report. Then you go to, and yeah, if you want to shop for 10 hours, that's another way to do it to avoid the impact, but that's not going to be sufficient. So eco-labeling tends to be the way that that we can actually put real information about the product in layman's terms in a way that's cross-comparable across a number of products. So what's really cool about this is just stylized for my book. Microsoft, we actually published this as an example for every single piece of consumer hardware we put out. We say, if you're buying a computer from us, we will tell you exactly how much emissions per device, exactly where those emissions are coming from, different configurations of your device that you can buy if you want to increase or decrease the carbon footprint of your PC. That kind of stuff needs to become standardized across everything that we do. It is not there yet, but if we put the right pressure on and the carbon accounting continues to evolve over time, and waste accounting as well, it should become more apparent on packaging what is actually legitimate. And there are, pretty robust greenwashing laws in place to prevent greenwashing. I have told lawyers to take a look at some companies' claims before, and those claims mysteriously disappeared a couple of weeks later. So, I've done this too. But there is real teeth behind the threat of a lawsuit from the FTC or otherwise that you are false advertising on environmental claims, for sure, even in this administration. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't mean to be a pessimist.
Please, bring it in.
I am a journalist, so when I look at this, I'm asking, where is there to be I don't feel I don't feel optimistic about this breakdown because 85% of it is nothing I can do except divest my money, which like a lot of, there needs to be a bigger divestment movement. But I appreciate that Microsoft would put that out there, but again, 85% of it is up to them. So how am I supposed to be, I'm just asking because you wrote, this is about optimism.
Sure. Yeah.
Where I don't feel optimistic looking at that.
So this is where I think that's a super fair perspective, and the push I would give is I would disagree that there's nothing you can do about this. So on one hand, your purchasing decisions really do matter to the point of if we get the labels out there, if we know that the carbon footprint of making it is the worst, when you inevitably have to purchase a new piece of hardware, in theory, you can look across the impacts and say, I'm going to reward the company that has actually put the most money towards decarbonizing its supply chain. Right now, it's going to be us or Apple. that are really trying to push it right now. The other thing that I think this incentivizes, which can become more fun, is if you know that this is an issue, it justifies, I think, a lot more of the focus on saying, okay, well, there is a premium in me keeping this device as long as possible, purchasing refurbished, making sure that when this is done, it's being used by someone else and not actually just kept into in a closet somewhere. I do agree with you that like I wish that the daily usage could have more levers, but it's kind of these big moment decisions that, you know, now that you know this, if you didn't know this, you wouldn't know to optimize against it. And like, I mean, like, it's very fair for you to say like, but I wish I could do more. I think that's super fair. And until companies get that number even further down,
Right.
There's a limit to what you do. But just for what it's worth, all the supply chain decarbonization we've done at Microsoft has reduced the per manufacturing footprint of our devices by 40%, which is awesome. We need to go like 40% again to really get it to the point where the usage phase is something that gets there. But at least like you can vote with your dollar for the companies that are trying to solve this for you.
Well, I guess like also where I had a question is that, you know, where's the incentive for the company? And yes, it is like in us, in what we're doing, but I'm curious if you're seeing that kind of pull back the message around sustainability and marketing, because things like this, I mean, I don't know if there's like a commercial made based on this idea, but I'm sure like if we were able to compare this data to data from other computer companies, then yeah, a lot of people would be like, yes, I'm going there.
Yeah.
But like, are the companies actually like leaning into this still, considering the political climate we're in?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. And this is actually very exciting. And this is, you know, I feel fortunate that I get access to the insider information, I guess, that you don't necessarily have. One is when we're selling computers, like half of our business is selling to other companies. Those other companies care quite a lot about this. And so we have companies who will be like, I want to buy 10,000 computers, but I will only buy them if they're made with recycled materials. Or I want to buy 20,000 computers, but I am going to put in my RFP that they have to have the lowest potential carbon footprint, especially in Europe, but also elsewhere like even the United States government. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they used to say like, if you don't have this particular eco-label called EPEAT, we will not purchase your computer. So there is an amazing financial incentive when companies sell to other companies. When companies sell to individuals, it is a little bit harder. Repairability is the clear one that has been of all the features you can give me, repairability is the one I care about the most. And the other thing that's interesting, at least for my company, is we have a carbon tax. We charge ourselves a carbon tax. So I'm still incentivized to do this because it lowers my tax bill. But that's good. You want to align the incentives in the right way. So it's not a perfect answer for you. There's more that we wish we could do, but it is moving in a direction where like change is happening even if it's not as fast as we'd like.
But it's still happening now.
1,000%.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there is very real investment. People have not given up. I mean, we literally just had something called the Climate Council last week at Microsoft, and that's like every CVP in the company getting together to be like, how are we doing on our climate goals? What do we need to do still? So it is still happening.
Okay.
I will then move, so maybe that's a nice segue. Sorry, you did have a hand up earlier though.
A couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
About how to balance optimism with long-term environmental doomism, and whether optimism kind of plays into an excuse to maintain the status quo.
So that's a very fair push. And so the way I would say that like being optimism is not putting your head in the sand and be like nothing is wrong so we don't need to change anything. In my mind, the pragmaticism behind optimism is because the people who were not trying to lead with the like let's have fun solving this problem were getting nothing done in my company. And so the reason for this is that the vast majority of people who actually quote unquote do sustainability are not the sustainability professionals. Typically you have sustainability professionals who might be central offices or they might be specialized like clean energy procurement. But if you're talking about like designing a computer, and I'll go back to like the computer version, you don't have people with sustainability degrees who are employed to design the computer. You have people who have industrial design backgrounds, you know, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering backgrounds who are actually like designing these computers. And so they have a million things on their plate. And all of them are good things. Like, you know, they're being told by their boss, like you have to minimize costs, or even like good things, which is you have to improve accessibility. sustainability is one additional thing that they have to consider in their trade-off matrix of what they personally want to go to bat for, as well as what they professionally think will be helpful for their product. And so if they are being told by people who are not being joy forward, like, do this or else, or do this or I'm going to hate you, the person who's saying that has no actual leverage to get them to do something. So if you don't, in a world where you don't have leverage, and now granted, this is where laws help because laws create leverage, but in a world where you don't have leverage, the way you get people to get involved in something tends to be getting them excited about it, making them really happy to like say, you know what? I normally make mice that are chock full of plastic, but let me try playing with this ocean plastic for a little bit, because that way, maybe we'll learn something fun along the way. And we have over 1,000 people working on sustainability at my day job, and the majority of them don't have sustainability in their title. There are people who have been like so enthusiastic to come along the journey, and that's where it's not ignoring them, it's being pragmatic of how do you solve the problem, given that we don't have leverage in many, many cases to actually do things. In the interest of time, I might keep going here, because Dave, keep me honest, when do I gotta stop talking?
I think it's 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, okay. Yeah, you guys all didn't hear to come. The book's cool, but you guys want to talk about Microsoft, so we'll go do that. Out of curiosity, this is what we're going back for the data. This is a chart that I've taken all the numbers off that represent the breakdown of where Microsoft's emissions come from. Most companies are going to be very similar. Out of curiosity, you can see there's a big light green one, there's a big dark green one. If you were to guess what those top 2 sources of emissions might be, what would you maybe guess?
Data centers.
What specifically about them?
AI-generated data centers.
What specifically about it?
Energy uses of them.
So energy using and cooling, I heard.
And water.
Water.
Emissions.
The emissions generally, and then in the back.
Transporting of the products they make.
And the transport of the product. So I love it. This is a good mix. This is what's fascinating. Are people here, do everyone know what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are? Should I do a quick little, I'm seeing some nods and some no's, but very quickly, scope 1 emissions are the emissions associated with the fuel you burn on site. So for us, that's mostly our campus vans and backup generators at data centers, 1% of the emissions. Scope 2 is the emissions from procuring or the use of electricity off of the grid. For us, it's less than 2%. And the reason for that is shocking, because you're but doesn't AI use a lot of energy? Yes, that you can't get away from that. It uses a ton. But we also have contracted 34 gigawatts of clean energy against that load. And so per the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, even though it takes a lot of energy, we are bringing an equivalent amount of energy online to the same grids in which we operate, which helps us get that number close to 0. That then leaves scope 3, which is the emissions of the supply chain. And this is what's so fascinating, is if you look at the 3 parts that are the biggest here, the light green purchase goods and services, that tends to be the manufacturing of our consumer hardware. So Xbox and Surface and various other business surfaces, it's the making of these computers that tends to be in that category. The second one, capital goods, this refers to all the capital expenditures we make, which in a data center environment is the purchase of the servers from NVIDIA, the chips, the GPUs, as well as the construction of the data center. So literally the steel and the concrete and the timber that make the buildings themselves. The third one is what I said before, which is about 12% comes from you guys playing Fortnite and Halo or whatever. And that's a whole different problem set to solve of how do you get the impact of the game itself to get more sustainable. But it's the first 2 that's so fascinating, and that's where I spend so much of my time at work, focused on what do we do to mitigate not just the amount of energy that we use, because we actually have a solution for a lot of that. It's what do we do about the stuff that doesn't really have a solution yet, which is how do you build a building that takes 0 emissions to build in the first place? That stuff is so interesting. So some of you might have even seen that we invested in a steel manufacturing plant in Sweden. It was Sweden. It makes steel using green hydrogen, and that makes steel that is 97% lower carbon than traditional steel. And it's okay, cool. This technology company is now just invested in a steel manufacturing plant. But that's the kind of stuff we get to look at, which is really cool, because it's if we're making data centers, what do we do to mitigate that impact? It's through things like that, through low carbon concrete, which we've also got some investments in. We're also the first company to start building mass timber data centers, which is fun. And mass timber is actually more fire resistant than steel. You might be surprised by that, but it's because when steel gets hot, it bends, and that makes things fall over. But timber kind of just burns from the inside, and you can take care of that. Anyway, fun fact. I don't know if people here are big timber people. So this is just data-driven. This is where the problem set that my work tends to solve. So when I tell my team to go focus on things, we're looking at the suppliers so much of the world, as well as the market creation. So the benefit of working at a company like mine, because even though we are building all of these big data centers, we're putting so much money into the system, we can divert and direct some of this money into building the market for these things that don't yet exist. You cannot build green steel or you cannot buy green steel on the market. There's a 7 times higher demand for it than supply. You cannot buy green concrete on the market. You cannot really buy mass timber at this level unless we invest in building these markets from basically nothing. And that's so much of what my time is now at work. Is before it was all about sustainable product development. Now it's all about sustainable market development, which is a very interesting problem set to solve now that we know the data. But go ahead.
Yes. So under purchased goods and services and capital goods, you're making a computer. It's got a black plastic outside. That has a cost, and it can't be recycled. Is that part of what the purchased goods and the capital goods includes?
Correct.
What's Microsoft doing about that?
Not making computers out of plastic. All of our computers are made out of metal, which are recyclable.
The outside
Yep.
covers?
Xbox is made out of plastic, but that is something that's a longer term problem to figure out. But that is.
I don't think I've seen a computer yet that had all metal on the outside, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I got one right here if you want to see it. So if you can see here, like all this is aluminum.
Right. What about the old-fashioned kind?
The old-fashioned kinds are mostly plastic, but we're not the ones making it. Those are the other guys.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so I got about 15 minutes left. I've kind of interspersed some of the Q&A in here. What would be most interesting and valuable to people? So the rest of the talk is about kind of just what it means to actually do sustainability in a corporation, the way in which people without sustainability backgrounds get involved, some tricks to get it started at your company, how it's effective, how sustainability is even just structured and governed in a corporate environment. I can throw all that out the window and talk about contract law, even though I'm not a lawyer. I do a lot of contract stuff. Like, you guys tell me. We got 15 minutes. I know you guys have a lot of questions, especially on data centers. I'm happy to take this wherever you guys want to go. As a person who is not representing Microsoft in this conversation. All right, we got a hand up. Where do we want to go?
I feel like I am curious about emissions still, and just like how Microsoft is sort of thinking about its emissions.
Yep.
Though I am also really curious about jobs. On this, I'm curious how much of, or maybe what percent of Microsoft's emissions are currently covered by offsets, from what and how those are evaluated.
Sure. This view does not include offsets.
Okay.
This view includes power purchase agreements, which are a financial mechanism for us to buy an equivalent amount of clean energy in the same grid in which we operate. I would not classify that as an offset because we are actually legitimately putting new clean energy onto a grid. Offsets in our world are something that we like to consider carbon removal, where we're explicitly financing the removal of carbon from the atmosphere. Anything from, we actually got in quote unquote trouble the other day because the headline was like Microsoft funds poop. But what we were actually doing is funding a way to take the emissions from, discard and bury it effectively, so it's not going back into the environment. None of that is in here, but our goal is come 2030 that the entirety of that pie is completely taken away by the program that we're building on the carbon removal space. And right now, it sounds like it's cool, but it's actually a problem. We're 80+% of the entire carbon removal market. We can't be the only buyer. So a lot of our time is spent trying to get other people to also get into this space too, so that there's enough of a market signal that people can feel confident that they can start their own carbon removal projects and companies and may be guaranteed to be able to get financing. Market making is tough, as it turns out. But yeah, go ahead.
Charlie, I think it would be helpful for people to understand the internal carbon tax and how that works, because that's actually fueling and funding a lot of the efforts and ongoing kind of attention that's being focused within Microsoft. And, while you guys are leaders in CDR, and that's awesome, but also so much leaders in that space and internal carbon setting.
Carbon tax is really fascinating. We're one of the only companies that I know that does this. So we have a rate that we charge ourselves to every business group P&L for how much they emit. And typically that's an externality. Companies have gotten away with having other people pay for it for years. We bring it internal. We use the proceeds of that to then fund our carbon removal program, saying like, okay, well, if we emitted 10 million tons of carbon and we need to remove 10 million tons of carbon, then the amount we'll charge ourselves for the carbon fee is equal to what it would cost to offset those emissions, which is perfect. That's exactly the kind of thing that would be really cool to see at more companies. But the functional example of that is like, it's a very true story. When we were designing some of our computers, before we were able to get recycled materials in, we started putting the carbon fee as a line item in the product financial one-pager effectively, saying, okay, every time we make a computer, it costs X number of dollars for the chassis, X number of dollars for blah, and then X dollars for carbon fee. And I had a vice president call me. He's like, hey, what's this carbon fee thing? I was like, yeah, well, you got to pay it because that's what we're doing. He's like, how do I make it smaller? And that's all I needed to hear. And he's like, I'm like, I can tell you how to make it cut in half. He's like, okay, what do I need to do? And it was literally that. I got literally, this is so cool. I got everything I asked for how did we design our computers, everything, because the carbon fee helped so much of that process, which is so cool. Like, you know, there's more to do, but you know, we got the head, like I've been able to get dozens of people hired at Microsoft just to focus on solving the remainder of this problem. Now we know what to do, but the carbon fee is the continued driver of being able to do that. And then someone here also has talked about water. Water's not embedded in here. We also have a water tax. So we tax ourselves for how much water that we use, because we also, our commitment is to be water positive. We have to replenish more water than we use across our global operations. And so like we're doing deals with like Ducks Unlimited, which is cool because they're a duck hunting company, but also does a lot of wetland conservation preservation. For them, it's for hunting, but we're like, hey, let's see what we can do to divert some of the water tax that we've collected to help fund wetland conservation on your end, which is really fascinating. But go ahead.
Are you moving away from using such a high amount of water? I read that every 2 conversations uses a liter of water with ChatGPT. So it's not like an unlimited resource. Is there moving away from using it?
So the good news is less than that, but the formal numbers have yet to be published. The thing I'm very proud of in my company is, I'm going to go to this slide here, is it was people in this circle. So like I'm over here, I've got a full-time sustainability job. That's super cool. It was regular old people who said, you know what? We don't feel great about the water that some of these data centers use. And they're the ones that really led the charge to say, let's, for our next data center design, see if we can get rid of water altogether. And that is what we did. And so our existing data center fleet uses water because it was built before we really started focusing on it. But any new data center coming up right now is built with something called direct-to-chip liquid cooling. It's really cool stuff. So what it does is it takes a liquid. So it's not like there's no liquid anywhere in the facility. And also people have to drink water. But like it takes a liquid, it gets it down. We actually just published an article on something called microfluidics. So it's like we're literally etching little canals in chips. And we're putting the liquid through these little etched chips to take the heat away, because that's exactly where the heat is being generated, and then pumping that outside to let the heat dissipate before we bring it back in. It's a closed loop system, and it saves the equivalent, this is what we said publicly, it saves the equivalent of 125 million liters of water per data center per year. So I'm pretty proud of that one. If there are other, how should I say this? There's a certain search engine company you might have heard of that has not done this. So don't use Gemini. So hopefully a decent answer to the question. Yeah. You probably got some online.
Interesting question from the chat. Acknowledging that using green energy helps, is Microsoft willing to alert customers each time before they use generative AI as to the amount of energy or water a search will take so that consumers can take that into account?
So Google has gone out on record and actually published what it takes in terms of energy and water per query to their Gemini. But yes, in theory, this goes to everything we were saying before of like, if we really are empowered more than ever before to actually know the real impact of what's going on, if we can give you something like this for when you are buying a computer, we should be able to give you something like this for when you are making a decision of how to use your AI model. The challenge is not necessarily like, oh, we don't want to say it because it'll make us look bad. The challenge is also like, what do you draw as the boundaries of what is or is not in scope? Like, Do you do you include the embodied carbon of a building against a single use of an AI model? It's kind of a hard question to figure all that out in the specific bounds. But we've, the industry, especially with Google making its disclosure, is starting to at least put something out there and crystallize. It might not be the perfect boundaries, but they are boundaries. Let's try it. Let's move forward and let's see how it evolves, which requires a lot of lawyers to figure all this out, by the way. So you guys, this is in a space where gainful employment. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you talked a lot about carbon removal as sort of the strategy to offset your impact. Could you give some examples of that, and how confident are you that the numbers on carbon removal are actually true?
Totally. So it's a fantastic question. The reason we care about carbon removal, by the way, is because even if we are the best company in the world and do literally everything available to us to minimize the impact of our footprint, there's going to be something left over. No one can truly make something zero. The best of my ability, I could not make this a zero impact book, at least not today. So we have to go into the carbon removal market. The reason I call it the carbon removal, not carbon offset market, is because we actually do not buy carbon offsets. Carbon offsets will give you a credit for the prevention of new emissions from going in the atmosphere. Carbon removal says we are only going to receive a credit if we explicitly remove carbon from the atmosphere that was not previously removed. So the way in which we have confidence here is thanks to our legal department. And so this is where contracting innovation comes in. We said, okay, if we actually want to have rigor behind making sure that if we're signing this big multi-million-dollar deal, we're actually getting something out of it, we need a really strong contract that has teeth and has a lot of deliverables that ensure that we are not just paying for nothing. So we actually are taking the exact way that we've built the power purchase agreement structure of how we buy clean energy and trade clean energy, and said, can we apply a lot of those principles, including the additionality elements, to the carbon removal space? And so, fun fact about Microsoft to this point, our head of sustainability for the whole company, Melanie Nakagawa, she reports to our president, who is in charge of all the lawyers. So our head of sustainability reports into the head of all the lawyers. And that's great for a company like us, because so much of the work we're doing is on this contract innovation to say, okay, this company, you are claiming that you are going to give us 100,000 tons of carbon from the growth of, and the protection and growth of old growth forest in this region. Here is the contract that guarantees that you are proving it to us, that it is audited, and that if you fail to deliver upon this, there are severe financial penalties for you. So this is the benefit also of working with a lot of lawyers, is we're not afraid to sue people if they do not deliver on their end of the contract. So the kind of deals that we do are either biogenic, which is nature-based. We'll do some carbon capture and storage, where we might like biochar. You might have heard of biochar before. That's kind of an intermediate that can store carbon for hundreds of years. And then we do mechanical solutions as well. And that's been more of the innovation portfolio of we financed that plant in Iceland that's trying to suck carbon out of the air. We're learning as we go that that's not as effective as we had hoped, but that's the whole suite. But because it's not effective as we hoped, we have legal protections that we can use. And I'm not here representing Microsoft saying that we're going out and suing specific individuals or anything like that. I'm just saying that the contracting space is quite fun to guarantee that the people we do business with can actually give us what we ask for. So, long answer to your short question.
One more?
Yeah, sorry. You've been patient in the back, so.
Yeah, my question would be, knowing that you have 75% of the carbon footprint being in that making space, how does that relate for Microsoft's partners? Specifically, I think a lot about with data centers, how chips are developing so quickly that that's a source you continue to have to go back to. What kind of work is Microsoft doing in a partner like NVIDIA that has all the leverage in the world right now to get them to be more sustainable in their practices?
So we have in our supplier code of conduct, which every supplier has to sign, a mandate that by 2030 you have to be running on 100% carbon-free energy. So we have a contractual, again, going back to the contracts, in the contract every supplier signs with us, they have an obligation to get to decarbonize the entirety of their electric load against us. Sometimes it's in countries that amount of clean energy does just not exist yet. And that it becomes a fun challenge that that supplier has to then be more active with their own local government to try to get more clean energy online. But it's a mix of that explicit, everybody has to sign this, or implicit with more explicit, we'll have targeted supplier reduction campaigns with specific suppliers saying, okay, you are a material portion of our emissions. we are going to actively monitor you, we're going to actively partner with you, and in some cases, maybe we co-innovate on something where we can help you unblock you to go and meet this obligation that we've placed on you. It's all going to come down to how many of these suppliers actually end up complying, but we are, I mean, every single supplier that does business with us hopefully knows that they have signed a contract that requires them to decarbonize their operations. Yeah, but all this being said, I know I've got 1 minute left. I know there's some questions I've not got to, which I apologize. I think I'm going to leave a couple of quick last flash things that are interesting because a lot of folks here are looking for potential employment in the future. I want to just quickly show this to show that when a company has a sustainability team, that doesn't really mean anything. We have sustainability teams is the better way to say it. There's a corporate sustainability team. It's like the federal government. They govern the entire company. You have state level sustainability teams, which is what I represent. I lead the state of cloud operations sustainability. But then you've got functional sustainability teams. These are the ones that are going and implementing. That's like a local city. So in the same way you have that breakdown of governance across the federal government, same thing about the breakdown of governance in the corporate environment. And so if you add up all these people, I said it before, we've got over 1,000 people working on sustainability. I am one of 10, 15 dedicated sustainability teams across the company, which is awesome. But in each of those is opportunities for gainful employment, whether or not you're in the sustainability team or you are enabling that sustainability team to make a green claim, to confidently make sure that you are building the right contract to get what you just contracted for. There's a lot of really cool, fun lawyer stuff happening. And I normally don't say that, but this is pretty cool going on to make sustainability happen. Okay, make it exciting, make it fun. We talked about some of this stuff. This is stuff I've personally been involved with. That's all cool, whatever. We're at time, so I'm just going to stop. Thank you, guys.